So, how infections can shape the evolution of our human genetics? We're going to talk about how Black Death or the bubonic plague shaped our genetics, current population genetics, to a point that this is where we have some of our autoimmune diseases as a consequence of that selection we've experienced in the past. Surprise, right? Just who would have known? So we're going to talk about this new paper that just came out recently. Super interesting because of what the authors did, which is what they looked is they looked at over 200 human genetic samples dating with people who died prior to the bubonic plague in the medieval times, as well as during, as well as after, and they looked at specific immune genes and wanted to see how did this mass die-off event that happened in medieval times might have affected our population genetics. So very, very interesting stuff. Very cool. So let's get started. My name is Dr. Mikhail Rashik of Neurogenomics. And first, I already told you what they did. Maybe let's talk about what bubonic plague was very briefly. It was a bacterial infection. I believe this was called Yersinia pestis. This is from memory. Forgive me if I screwed up the name. However, I'm pretty sure I got the pestis part because it made me think of pesto. and that bacterial infection caused two pandemics. The first one was in Roman times. In 1540 AD, it was called Justinian plague. But the really big one, the one that we all think of, bubonic plague or Black Death, is the one that happened in medieval times in 1348 and 1349. Massive die-off event happened. This affected the entire Europe, Mediterranean, Middle East, as well as Northern Africa. And depending on the region, 30 to 50% of people died. So incredible, just incredible, massive amount of death. And of course, that it's known that such mass die-off events will shape the future genetics because you drastically reduce the genetic pool. And as a consequence, and it's known that infections, viral infections, pathogen infections can definitely also evolutionary shape our genetics. Now, whether that's happening with SARS-CoV-2, there's not enough death occurring, while of course there's lots of death, but in a context of entire global population, that might not be the case in comparison to what happened during the bubonic plague, but you get the point. So what the authors of this study wanted to see is, well, what did happen with the genetics? And they looked at genetic information isolated from burial sites, cadavers obviously, burial sites in London, as well as numerous sites in Denmark. And between those two populations, the reason why I think they wanted those two populations is to be able to find genetic markers in both. They found many genetic markers, but specifically 4 genetic markers that coincided with both of these populations that influence future immunity of our population, as well as help the survivors at the time. So one of the markers, for example, was for a gene that I'm going to call ERAP2, ERAP2, and the genetic mutation allowed selection of different transcripts than otherwise would have been selected. Let me unpack that for you a little bit. So recall the dogma, biological dogma, is that you start with genetic information that's housed inside the nucleus. That's like a repository of information, okay? I often say the genetic information acts as a blueprint to produce proteins, which are like little robots inside your cells, but there's a step in between. First, you need to copy the genetic information into what then becomes a blueprint, and that's your mRNA. It's also known as transcript. And the reason why is because the process of copying your genetic information inside your nucleus into mRNA is called transcription. So mRNAs are also called transcripts, and then mRNA, like the one that is introduced in the mRNA vaccines, is then used as a blueprint to produce protein of interest that will do the little robotic work inside the cell. In the case of mRNA shots, the mRNA is used as a transcript to produce spike protein. Obviously, we all already know that, right? So then this is what genes do. Genes only is only a small fragment of your entire genome. The rest of the genome is used for regulating how your genes are supposed to be used, for example. But the small percentage of your genome, approximately 2%, that are genes, they are responsible for producing transcripts. Now, what's very cool about genetics or genomics is the incredible flexibility that they can offer, and this is definitely the case in humans. So what we can do is have a single gene but produce multiple different transcripts or multiple different kinds of mRNA from a single gene. So you can almost think of like if a gene is composed of a segment 1, 2, and 3, you can create an mRNA that has both all of the 1, 2, 3 segments, but you could produce an mRNA or transcript that has only segment 1 and 3, or segment 2 and 3, or segment what else would there be? I think that's it. So then you can shuffle it, and then this way you can create an array of similar but still distinctively different proteins from a single gene. And this is exactly what these authors were able to find, that the mutation that survivors of the bubonic plague had, they were producing fuller transcript. So imagine it had that segment 1, 2, 3, fuller transcript of that gene ARAP2, ERAP2. And what they believe that helped the survivors is to for the immune system to be able to present better fragments of the pathogen to the cytotoxic killer T cells, and therefore start cleaning the infection more efficiently. So this is what they believe that might have helped for the survivors of the bubonic plague by having this particular mutation. But as I already mentioned at the beginning of the video, at the same time, it looks like these mutations are also linked to certain autoimmune diseases. And in this case, it's known that this gene currently is involved in infections. It plays a role in other infections, but it also is involved in predisposition to something like Crohn's disease. So that's how you can have surprise unintended consequences in evolution, where at one point genetic information might be helping survival of the species, but in another point, centuries later, it could be problematic, including it could be a problem during yet another pandemic event. So you never know with genetic material what the unintended consequences might be. And that actually goes for the vaccination as well with the mRNA vaccines, because we didn't have an opportunity to study the unintended consequences, because we wanted to go fast, because we wanted to deal with the dangers of with the health crisis, right? So we still are yet to potentially discover if there are any unintended consequences from choosing to not investigate on a deep molecular level what might be the consequences of affecting our immune system in such a way. But I mentioned there's other 3 markers that they discovered, those other 3 genes that they discovered, and that seem to be propagated further and help people to survive the bubonic plague. They were involved in selection of specific cytokines, and cytokines are little proteins or chemicals that help to control immune system, including, of course, fighting the pathogen. So that was one positive effect, and another genetic markers were involved in helping macrophages present the fragments of pathogens to the immune system. So macrophages are what is referred to as antigen presenting cells. I apologize, wind is coming in. Antigen presenting cells, they swallow the pathogen, break it apart, and they present its fragments on its surface to the immune system, so the immune system knows what to react to. All right, so apparently the genetic mutations that the survivors of the bubonic plague had allowed the macrophages to present that information even more efficiently to the immune system. But together, those other markers, the consequences, some of them are predisposing, for example, currently in this current day, to rheumatoid autoimmune disease. So if you have that particular condition, then you can now understand potentially this is partially because it might have been selected in the past by the bubonic plague. So I thought this is super interesting. It's fun to combine the main focus of the channel, which is of course the molecular biology of the immune system related to COVID, as well as the mRNA vaccines, but to also link some of the genetic stuff, which is really the big passion of mine, and talk about that. So that's all I have for you right now. I gotta keep going up higher up the mountain. So everyone, please stay healthy and please stay active. Get out into the nature as much as possible. Clearly, that's my number one message to everyone. I want to make a statement that we need to protect our immune systems, and one of the ways that I propagate is to be active and especially be in nature. It doesn't have to be crazy activity. Go for a walk in your nearest park, and of course, very healthy lifestyle. So that's really the top message I want to propagate in all of these videos. Thank you everyone for all your likes. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Please share the video. You know how it helps, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of you at the upcoming COVID Q&A event. Those are fun events where we basically answer some of the top questions that people ask on the YouTube channels related to these topics, and then it's open mic. If you want to get a free ticket to that, then just subscribe to our newsletter. All that information is provided in the description below, and hopefully I will see you very soon later today. Bye everyone.